Andrew, I'd be curious your thoughts on algorithmically generated content, and do you think that will have an impact in the fake news space when we can actually generate content very quickly, maybe at a speed where we can't actually reliably estimate its factual accuracy?
That's a great point and a great concern. I think, there has to be a combination of automated tools plus moderation. So I think that, where the automatically generated content, where we can identify patterns that predict whether something is fake and those patterns include not just the content itself, but the metadata, how frequently is it spreading? Where is it coming from? Et cetera, et cetera. And some of those tools and techniques can help identify. And so the question is, do you use these automated tools to automatically suppress or strike down certain posts or tweets? Or do you allow them to go up, flag them as problematic, and then have a live moderator go through and remove some of them? Do you automatically take them down and then have a moderator go through them and whitelist them and say, actually, this one can be uploaded? And how quickly are the algorithms being updated? So I think that is a challenge. I think that none of the platforms, not Facebook, not Twitter, have the ability to review every single piece of content that's posted, and to have a live human review every single piece of content that is posted and decide whether it's to be allowed or not. But with better algorithms, hopefully, we may be able to identify some of the things that are most likely to be problematic, flag which ones should be immediately suppressed, which ones should be investigated further, which ones, and then there has to be a review process where the ones that are suppressed are reviewed by a live person, and then that information has to be used to update the algorithm.
Hey, this is Vinay. First of all, Andrew, thanks a lot for this presentation. It really opens up a lot of thinking, avenues that, all these information out there, how people are using or misusing it, and making yourself aware what is right and what's wrong. So, on the question previously asked on the same line, one thing I will ask that, the fake news, it's not a binary, right? You can't say it's, yes, this is totally fake, or this is true. This is true. There must be a scale out there, right? So how do you really measure based on the sensitivity, amount of impact it may have, or, the other factors? Have you started collecting that type of information to maybe rate that fake news? That this is something which may impact a whole lot of audience.
That's exactly right. There is defining what is fake and what isn't is a big part of the challenge. It's not the only part of the challenge, but it's a big part of it. So there's some things that we know are fake. So for example, when you have people holding up signs with Hillary Clinton in a fake quote where she says, "I think Sharia law will be a powerful new direction of freedom," that's obviously fake news. But then there are a lot of other things that are not as obviously fake. And so the question is, at what point do we draw the line? So there's some set of things that should be suppressed, and there's some set that should not be suppressed. And then there are others where there's going to be a judgment call. So who makes that decision? Facebook has its policies, Twitter has its policies. We've all seen examples of things that have been removed from Facebook and Twitter that, in our personal opinion, should not have been removed. And we've all seen things that have not been removed that we feel should be. And my opinion is going to be different from your opinion. So I don't think we have the answer yet. What is the role of government? What is the role of the platforms themselves? What is the role of the community that is present on those platforms? And how do we govern this? So, one option is to have people flag things. So you can flag content on Twitter and Facebook, and Facebook and Twitter have different policies about whether they just hide that from you, for instance, or whether they have a live person review that content. And then after that live person reviews that content, what does that person decide? And if you disagree with that decision, what are your options for appeal? If you feel that they removed content that shouldn't have been removed, or you feel they've allowed content that shouldn't be allowed. So, there isn't a structure in place right now, either at the platforms or government, that solves those problems. And they're difficult problems. These are issues that television continues to face, and television is a technology that has been around for 70 years. So these are not solved problems, but we can do a lot better than we're doing right now.
Okay. This question, I'm going to turn back over to Jeffrey. I have a question for you. We see today in the BI space going more toward real-time analytics, Internet of Things, real-time data streaming in. You mentioned a little bit about sensors on trucks and some of the things that are going on there. Can you talk about where you see IoT and real-time analytics, or how that's affecting Red Classic?
Absolutely. So some of the trends in transportation now is the ability to understand exactly what's going on with the truck at any given point in time in the shipment, right? So you need to understand, okay, if we ship this truck from Charlotte to, say, Tennessee or just anywhere, okay, we pull in weather forecasts and say, okay, well, the weather's going to cause delay. Well, we need to contact the actual consignee and tell them, hey, we're going to be late because of the shipment, or can we reroute it somewhere else to be able to go somewhere? So you can take the GPS information of the truck to understand where it is. You can pull in weather information. Those are things that are being done right now. A lot of transportation companies now are really focusing on that last mile delivery, about how they can actually empower and use real-time information to be able to let their customers know exactly when things are arriving. I mean, Amazon's doing it, and bigger trucking companies, more traditional trucking companies, are starting to walk into that space as well. Yep.
Can I add to that?
Yes, sir.
I'm here not because I know anything about trucking, but I'm here for psychological support to this man here. But I'm also a consultant, so I'll always have an opinion on things, right? So that's a good question. On the IoT front, we were talking the other day, amongst many other things, transportation is one industry where the cost has been coming down consistently, not because of volumes, but just because of technological improvement. The regulation on this industry have only gone up. The expectations from this industry have only gone up. There was a time when, hey, if you ordered something in a catalog today, it'll arrive within the next 3 to 4 weeks, and it was acceptable. Today, if the order doesn't arrive tomorrow, we kind of feel left out, right? So technological advances have been huge, but it's still a very, very analog industry. There's still trucks being driven by people. It's totally, so I'm in awe of this industry. So whatever you guys do here is amazing. And IoT and self-driving and all these things just are going to be like, they'll be changing the industry significantly as next generation. So.
Absolutely. Actually, a huge change happened with the industry just in the last 2 years. Before this year, which has now actually become a true mandate at the end of this year going into 2020, electronic logs. You now actually have to have a logging device on your truck that has to track how many hours your driver is driving to ensure you're up to code with the Department of Transportation regulations. Before, a driver used to have a piece of paper and track their hours. Now you actually have to be able to have that truck tracked at all times. Once again, to your point about requirements on this industry, safety becoming a big part of it. I mean, it's a very dangerous piece of equipment. There are a lot of pieces of technology that are now coming and becoming part of the requirement of operating these companies that is going to not only drive up the competitive nature of this industry, but drive out companies and make it where there's only going to be few players left at the end of it all.
Hi, this is also for Jeffrey. This is going to sound pretty controversial. So we hear often that business strategy, defining business strategy with BI is like driving a car, looking only in your rear view mirror. So how do you take what you were doing with your data, for example, using the ELT to be able to be flexible and agile, and use that to drive strategy and become proactive with identifying and leveraging what you have?
That's a good question. So a lot of analytics falls into what we would describe as the descriptive analytics phase, right? We look at the past to be able to identify what's going forward in the future, to be able to find trends where we're not operating efficiently, where we can move forward. The ability to leverage information, and the closer you can get to real time with that information, empowers the business. So if you're one day behind, it's not great, but at the same point in time, it's better than being a couple of days behind, right? And as companies are now starting to develop more and more tools, we are moving closer to that real time where we can make those decisions, as I said before, about we need to route the truck differently to be able to make sure it stays as optimally used as possible. In terms of our company, some of the big things we're doing is making sure that we're keeping utilization up, making sure we're using the truck the best way possible, make sure we're getting the most miles. Some of that right now with our model as we move forward with more tools is to review the next day and say, hey, your fleet was X% empty. What happened? Why did we plan it that way? What decisions made us to go to that place? How do we make different decisions today to be able to be more efficient as an organization? Hopefully that answered your question.
Can I add on?
You want to add to
Yeah,
his answer?
can I add on to that a little bit? So I'm with AAA, the Carolinas, and so that's a question we deal with all the time is how do we take the data, whether it's you had a roadside assistance event last month, last year, are you going to have them in the future? So we take all of that data. We have, say, 20 years worth of roadside assistance calls that we've done, 1 million calls a year. That gives us a pretty good body of knowledge to actually predict where the next breakdown is going to be, right? Is it going to be at 77 and 485? We'll predict how likely there's going to be a breakdown there, and we'll actually position our trucks in that space. We'll actually schedule dispatchers, we'll schedule truck drivers, we'll position trucks in that area. So what happens, right? You get a better customer experience, right? It's safer for that person on the road. Ultimately, we hope that it adds more revenue to us, but in the end, it's a member experience that we have for those members, those AAA members, right? So this is something we can do, and it's not terribly hard with, time series forecasting. That's pretty straightforward, but we can get a pretty good estimate of where those are going to be. So this is us using past data, predicting, and having an impact on what's happening, this month, this quarter, tomorrow, actually. So, thank you.
But that's also an interesting angle because you're talking about moving from BI to analytics, right? So think of a traditional business model. The company or business would have a strategy, and BI would be used to measure the outcomes, right? Hey, we had a strategy to go into this market and gain 100,000 customers. How many did we actually gain? So BI would be used to validate or deny the expectations that they had. So that means the strategy was being validated by BI. It was still rear view based, like you said. I'm already seeing, and it's been going on for a while here, a couple of years, I think the last 1 or 2 years, it has been definitely going on in a more pervasive manner. But every single company will come to a point where instead of strategy driving BI, strategy driving analytics, it'll be the analytics that'll drive the strategies of a company. So you're a business that says, hey, I am AAA. We offer these kind of services. What are the other things that a typical consumer of ours want? And that's going to drive what AAA does tomorrow. The same with banks. Banks have a range of products, and they say, gosh, we have never been in name it, this kind of business, reinsurance business. Does it make sense for the banks to? They're going to run analytics on it first. They'll derive if there's value, and then they will come to that decision, and they'll still use the BI to validate. That time is upon us, and that's where I'm fascinated about how analytics is going to change the future.
This is Chang, and I have a question for Andrew, if it's still on the line.
Yep.
So one of the most disturbing development, I would say, in AI and machine learning is how easy it has become to generate fake videos and fake audios. Think of deep fake. And my question would be, from your experience, how has that, or how will it change the landscape of fake news and its consequences?
Yeah, so I think if I understood your question correctly, you're asking about fake audio and fake video where people are being made to say things that they didn't really say, for example?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that is, that is, in a sense, it's not that different from what was going on previously in that, I mean, if you go back decades, for instance, there are examples of political campaigns, and I'm thinking of an example of the Nixon campaign sending out the famous Muskie letter. So, the Nixon campaign sent out a letter purported to come from Ed Muskie, one of the Democratic candidates for president, and it wasn't actually from Ed Muskie. It was fake or fraudulent. And there are a lot of other examples over the last several decades of that happening in analog rather than digital. But now, with video and audio, first of all, it's much more persuasive. If you see someone or hear someone saying something, it's much easier to believe that they actually said it. And the quality of this has gotten better, and the cost to create this kind of fake news has gotten much lower. So I think we're just beginning to see the results of that. And I think that is pernicious. I think it's another place where technology tools can be leveraged to identify that kind of fake content. And again, sometimes it's as simple as looking for the skips. But again, it's gotten much, much harder with digital technology. I mean, it's easier to identify, but it's also easier to create better quality video and sound to prevent that. Some of the solution has to be in crowdsourcing. So, when a video or an audio comes from an event, and there are many people who were there who see the audio and video and say that's not what happened. Everybody's got a camera on their phone right now. So if you're videoing a political rally or a fundraising event or any public event, it's quite likely that someone else is videotaping the same event on their phone. So that's helpful. But there is still tremendous capacity for mischief. And again, I think part of the solution is technology, part of the solution is human beings, and part of the solution has to be regulation, both on the part of the platforms and at some point, government is going to get involved. That's inevitable.
Akshay here. This one's for Jeffrey. Whenever we talk about coming up with a business model or a business solution, so the data that we take into consideration is obviously from the past, but there are so many situations and so many circumstances that are going to change in the future, and many of those are unknown. And the data that we're taking into consideration might not be relevant in some of the cases. So how do you tackle that challenge?
Good question. So from an example, you talk about, let's talk about pricing in transportation. Nobody has a glass ball. Nobody can see the future, right? So when you talk about pricing from a transportation model, you have to think about quite a few things. You have to think about what you've actually been running specifically on certain lanes. Say, okay, from Charlotte to Columbia, South Carolina, it cost me this much, right? but if I go to an outside carrier, on average, it's cost me this much. So you can blend a combination of the information that you actually have inside your company with other pieces of information. For example, there are market indexes that actually say, hey, this lane will run for this much money, this lane it'll cost you this much, and you can start to build into models where you start taking your information historically, but also pulling information from other portions of the industry, as well as some of your own intuition, right? So I love to say that forecasting and any type of work like that is actually a combination of technology and art, and from a transportation perspective, the best example I can give you is pricing, right? We price things based on our historical because that's what we've done in the past. We use the market to be able to tell us what other people are doing, and then we look to the future to say, hey, what's going on? So we look at a lot of market journals, we look at a lot of economic reports to say, okay, hey, where do we see the industry going? What is, where do experts in the economics field say that, industry is going? For example, next year is going to be interesting, transportation, and when you go into a election year is always challenging because consumer confidence goes down, so you should be able to say, okay, we're probably not going to get as much freight next year as we would this year, so you have to start to blend some of these things in. So there's that combination of past knowledge, but also intuition and sort of insight into what's going on in the environment to be able to build your models out. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
Hello. Hi, my name is Tora. My question is for Andrew. Andrew, are you on?
What's that?
Oh, just checking if you're on. So I think it's really interesting how analytics could be used to identify fake news and tag it, but I think a lot of times fake news resonates with people, not because it's true, but because it emotes. And analytics, identifying it as fake news doesn't necessarily have that impact. So I kind of liken the identification of it being fake to like the correction section of a newspaper, and that never gets the attention. So do you think analytics or technology has a role in?
Yeah, so great question. And I think one of the things what some of the platforms have tested or investigated, and what some of the technology solutions that are being developed now are looking into is to provide ratings. So instead of having, say, one moderator, you would have a number of people look at something and either upvote or downvote it as fair and accurate, or unfair and inaccurate, and inaccurate. But of course, those things can be gamed. And so, you can use that to decide that these things should be, the things that are not reliable should be, as Zuckerberg said, demoted, but not disappeared from the newsfeed. You can use it to decide, well, perhaps people can still share this downvoted content with close friends and family, but not more widely, for instance. Or you can decide, okay, if the fact checkers say such and such, then we're going to pull it down entirely. So people are experimenting with different rating systems and different models where either you're crowdsourcing or you're using a set of trusted advisors, whether it's moderators or whether it's trusted public news sources. But then the question becomes, what kind of training do you give those moderators? And what do you select as your trusted news sources? So again, I don't think these are solved problems. And I think there's still a lot of work being done and to be done, and it's going to continue to change. And it's not something that's going to be resolved before or even after the 2020 election. This is something that is ongoing and is going to continue for many, many years to come.
All right, with that, let's.
Does that answer the question?
Yes. All right, so with that, let's thank our speakers one more time. So as a reminder, this is our last event of the year. The next event will be February 21st and 22nd. That'll be our hackathon hosted at Red Ventures. Please come out. If you're interested in opportunities with the Analytics and Big Data Society for next year, please come find myself or Rishi or Raja. We'll all be hanging around after this, and let's go enjoy our activities upstairs. Thanks.